Great, thank you. It's very happy to be here. Let me come around the front. So as you heard, we want to talk about a business plan and writing a business plan, delivering a business plan. A business plan should be a living document, so we want to make this a very interactive presentation. We want to get your involvement as much as possible. And as you've heard, let's start with even this upfront part, the didactic part, we want to make as interactive as possible. We're going to pause. We're going to ask you questions. We want to get your feedback. We want to get your reaction as we go. We go through the different our point of view on what makes a good business plan. But then where we want to wind up is actually to kind of turn the tables and allow you to interact with us, both react to some examples that we have, and a couple people have generously allowed us to present their kind of redacted examples of what they're thinking about, and we can discuss whether it's effective or not. And we also want to really give you the opportunity to stand up and give us an elevator speech. And it doesn't have to be, we're not going to focus on the content, but we'll go over some points, some tips about how to organize an elevator speech so that you can really deliver in a couple of minutes. Let's start with introductions. Starting with me, Greg Licholai. Currently I run a company for McKinsey. McKinsey is the large consulting firm, and what a lot of people don't know is that McKinsey has an incubator that we've got about a dozen companies. Mine is focused on pharmaceutical analytics, pharma, biotech, medical devices, and happy to talk about that if offline or after this meeting. And my close friend and colleague is Chris Gilligan.
So worked in early stage life science venture capital, investing in medical devices and as well as biotech. Currently continue to work with some biotech focused funds as well as startups and medical device startups, as well as serving as the director of the Center for Pain Medicine over at Mass General Hospital and teaching on the faculty at Harvard Med School. And I will tell you one thing that is hot off the press about Greg is that he was just called today and told that he is a partner at McKinsey, which is no small accomplishment.
Thank you. Well, coming from a Harvard professor, that's a compliment. So thanks very much. I appreciate it. And maybe Chris and I are good friends. Chris's background, as you heard, he's done a lot of successful things, but he's also has experience being a venture capitalist, hearing presentations, hearing pitches, whereas I've been more of a serial entrepreneur. And I'm going to be a little bit pie in the sky and tell you, the dreams and aspirations, and Chris is going to keep our feet on the ground and give you the perspective of financing and how investors react, roughly speaking. So please, let's make this interactive, ask questions and give us reactions as we go forward. Let's start off with talking about what is a business plan, just at the highest levels. What is a business plan is identifying and articulating the major components of what the purpose of your business is. So you need to identify the major stakeholders. What is the customer? What's the market opportunity? And who are the people who are going to run this business to go after that market opportunity? You also need to express the basic path that the business is going to be on, and to be able to articulate what your entry and exit is going to be. Entry in terms of starting the business, and eventually your harvest options, there's your exit strategy. How is this going to make money for the people who are seeding your companies? The goals of the business plan. If there's one thing that you should take away from tonight's talk, is always think about the audience. And different audiences are going to be thinking about different needs. And they're going to be analyzing your business plan their point of view, whether it's somebody supplying the capital, so a financier, whether it's somebody that could be a potential business partner, whether it's somebody that you be on the board, wants to be on the board. So the big message here is think of your audience, both in terms of the written plan as well as the elevator speech. And when you stand up and give the presentation, hopefully you'll have the chance to do that. Be thinking of your audience and what issues are going on in their mind.
A couple of quick points from the venture capital point of view. We would typically look at 1,000 plans in the course of a year throughout the fund. We would focus in on about 100, which captured our interest to the point of wanting to do some homework and look into it, and then would tend to invest in about 10. And not that infrequently, people would raise with us the point of, well, if you don't invest in this company, you're going to miss a great opportunity. So you will miss the opportunity to invest in the next Genzyme, and that'll be terrible for you. From our point of view, that was actually much less of a problem, because if we passed up on a great opportunity, that didn't necessarily hurt us directly. What actually hurt us a lot more was if we invested in something that turned out to be very problematic, because although we were limited to some extent by the amount of capital we had to invest, our biggest limitation was actually time. The amount of time we had to look into deals, and then the amount of time we had to serve on the boards and be involved with companies. And the biggest problem for us then was if we invested in a company and it became very problematic, because that by definition would become an incredible time sink. And that means you're not doing any new deals, you're not giving any attention to other deals. And what's more, a problematic company is many times going to turn out to be a huge time sink that will never actually turn into a success. So you'll first put in thousands of hours, huge distraction, huge loss of other opportunities, followed by eventual failure. So for us, it was much worse to invest in something that turned out to be a problem than it was to miss something that turned out to be a big success, because after all, as long as we caught another success, so be it. What that meant is, as we're looking at the 1,000 deals, we're really looking at reasons to reject them. And I can recall very distinct conversations where we're telling somebody, look, we're not going to invest in this. It's not a good fit for us. And they say, you don't understand. You're missing the opportunity of a lifetime, as if that would be what would persuade you. And it wasn't. My point in that is, if it's going to be 1,000 to 100 to 10, the one thing you want to make sure that you don't in any way provide is a reason for someone to reject it. Just focus on that. You don't want to make it easy to reject it, because all of those business plans have to be read by somebody, and then there has to be some reason for passing on it, and you don't want to make that rejection easier than it would otherwise be.
So Chris, what's the most common reason that you would have rejected
Sorry, I'm the one person in the
plan?
room who didn't put my phone on silent. Sorry. The most common reason that we would reject business plan? I would say the most common would be it not being a well thought out business, quite frankly. So the most common would be that you would pick it up and you would just say, listen, this is not a fully formulated idea in terms of how, because after all, we're looking at it, and what we need to know is the exit. How are we going to sell this in 3 or 4 years for $250 million, or have it go public in 5 to 7 years for $1 billion? Okay, how do we see that happening in a credible way? All right, then what are the steps to get from here to there? How much do we have to put in now? How much do we need to invest ourselves and convince others to invest in a few years? And if you got something that wasn't a fully formed idea, that didn't show you're going to put in $4 million now, in 3 or 4 years they will hit some milestones that will make it entirely likely that you'll be able to not just invest a few more million yourself, but convince other funds to put in money at that point without too much teeth pulling. And then it's pretty predictable that this will be $1 billion company in 4 to 7 years or so. If they don't give you that path, then there's just no point. And I would say the most common reason for just saying, all right, move on, is that it wasn't a fully formulated business idea, at least from the point of view of our needs, which were those. And therefore, it might be a great project, might be a great team, but that wasn't something that was going to serve the needs of the venture capitalists. So at least for us, it wasn't going to be an investment.
So is it fair to say that for those kinds of plans, a value inflection milestones were not clearly articulated?
Yeah, you'd say, you need to know, if we put in $4 million today, what's that going to get us to when that's going to be something that we're going to be able to raise the additional money in 3 years, 4 years, and then what's that additional money going to get us to that's going to get this acquired for $500 million or going public for $1 billion 3 years after that.
Great insights. Great insights. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the development plan and the path forward, but think about it from that point of view. That it's have you clearly articulated how much money and how many resources do I need to get to a milestone that increases the value of the company, so I can either get more money, go to the next level, take it public, get bought out, etc. What's the next value inflection milestone, and have I thought through the resources and the finances that I need to get there? Okay, terrific. All right, so I think we've been discussing these. Some of the successful elements of a business plan. Another thing, probably the second thing that you should think about is while you're thinking about your audience is looking for reasons to reject. More often than not, they've heard hundreds of business plans. So what's the chink in the armor here? So it often comes down to not a clear articulation of the plan. Maybe you've got that plan, but if it's not clearly articulated, that plan might not exist. Other issues that often come up are a lack of understanding of the particular industry. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Lack of evidence that there's demand and that there's a willingness to buy from the customer point of view. Again, clear description of the resources. One thing we haven't talked about is management. The quality of the management team is critical, and being able to play up to the strengths of the management team is critical.
And if I can make a couple, in terms of overview of industry, weaknesses that I thought I saw commonly were, and we talked about this in the previous session, a poor description, inadequate description of competition, and or being dismissive of competition. Because immediately, if you're looking at the plan and thinking of investing, the first thing you're going to do is do your homework about what are the competitors, and what's your best assessment of their true strengths and weaknesses. If a team comes in and says, well, there are only 3 competitors, and then 2 days of homework and I know about 3 others, all right, they're completely incompetent. If they come in and they say, well, there are 5 competitors, and it's true there are 5 competitors, but they're completely dismissive of them, and then I call the physicians who use that medication or that device, and they say, well, actually, it's pretty good. It meets, most of our needs. It's reasonably priced, so it's not perfect, but it's, 9 times out of 10, it's great. Again, that shows just incompetence, and we're going to look into the competition. So if we're going to look into the competition, we better not be able to figure out things that you didn't present. In terms of the unmet need that it meets, one of the big things that we would need to see, especially in terms of medical devices, was that it wasn't something that would be nice to have. It had to be something that you need to have. So too often we would see something where people are presenting a device saying basically there's an existing device or procedure that gets the job done, but wouldn't it be kind of nicer if it had laser guidance or something like that? Well, if it can't get the job done without laser guidance, and you can't do that procedure without that, then we were interested. If it's just that when people are doing that procedure, they can get it done, but it would be kind of cooler, it'd be like having air conditioning in your car, that is not going to convince a hospital to buy it, or at least we weren't going to gamble. It might convince a hospital to buy it, but it might not. And so need to have versus nice to have was a huge point for us on medical devices.
Terrific, terrific. Let's talk about the investor decision-making process.
Sure. So we're always looking, this is basically a repetition of the same point in terms of market need. We had to see that this was a completely unmet need, not just a marginal improvement. We need to see that it's a huge market. One flaw, I would say, as an MD, I can throw stones at any MDs in the audience. One flaw that I saw somewhat consistently from MD inventors was coming to us with a product rather than with a whole company. So in other words, saying, one very specific niche procedure, maybe one that happens a lot, and one product that could do that better, a better nasogastric tube or something of that sort. And that might be a good product. It might be very good to take to existing makers of nasogastric tubes and say, here, I got a better one, you should make it. But that doesn't make a company. So in terms of the market, we needed to see that something that addresses a big sector of the market. Remember, venture capitalists get paid really after they've paid back the initial fund. So if they're running $1 billion fund, they first got to return $1 billion, and then you get 20% of the profits above that billion. So the incentive is to invest in deals that are going to be huge returns. There really isn't a financial incentive for the venture capitalists to invest in deals that are going to be sort of nice, modest returns. Therefore, you have to be addressing huge markets and highly reimbursing. We wanted to know, how are you going to get to the market? With pharmaceuticals, if it's something that's going to go to primary care physicians, then you're going to probably have to go through the Pfizers and the Eli Lillys of the world, because you're not going to, as a startup, have a sales force that's going to get to every primary care physician in the US. Now, if it's a stroke drug for the subset of, for stroke neurologists and to some extent general neurologists largely at major medical centers, you may be able to get a sales force that can go find all of the stroke neurologists and can go to the major medical centers around the country. So we need to know you could get to it. If it's medical devices and you're going to make a new pacemaker, well, then we need to know how you're going to sell it, your company, to Medtronic and St. Jude, because they control the channels to the EP cardiologists who put pacemakers in. As a startup, you're unlikely to be able to get into that channel. In terms of the differentiation, we needed to see that it was going to be high profit. We weren't interested in investing in things that were going to be, mass market consumer things that were going to have a small margin on it. And we wanted to know how unique your product was compared to competition and how long your product's lifespan was going to be. Because we needed to know that we're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money to get this through regulatory. We want to know that product's going to be around for a long enough time to make it profitable. In terms of the management skills, the main thing that we wanted to see was ideally people who had done it before successfully. So we wanted to see a background in a similar thing. If it was biotech, we wanted biotech experience. If it was medical device, we wanted medical device experience. We would sometimes be backing people who'd been in large pharma or large medical device, but ideally we really wanted to see people who had gone through the startup process. Why is that? Because there are unique parts unrelated to the technology. We wanted people who had been through fundraising, knew how long it took, had relationships, had been through selling a company, had been through taking a company public. We didn't want to be the ones paying for anybody's education, quite frankly. The ideal for us, of course, was to invest in people who we'd invested successfully in before. And then barriers to entry. To some extent, barriers to entry in life sciences outside of services and IT are terrific. Basically, the FDA and patent law together present about the best opportunity for barriers to entry that anyone's ever seen. But we wanted to know very specifically how long we were going to have on the patents and how hard a regulatory barrier it would be for anybody else to follow up after us.
Terrific, terrific. And all these issues are existing, in the mind of the investor, of your audience. So being able to articulate and touch on them just shows that you've thought through what are the potential, not just all the good stuff and the potential upside, but that you've also thought through the potential downside. Because as you've heard, that they're looking for reasons to reject you. They're looking for a reason to say these guys are just being unrealistic.
Yeah. One quick point on intellectual property. We wanted to see that people had gone to both very high quality intellectual property attorneys and had found intellectual property attorneys who had a track record in that specific space. So if you're making surgical polymers, we wanted to see that you'd gone to a top shelf IP attorney and one who has, he or she has experience with life science polymers. If it was heart valves, we wanted you to have found one of the best IP attorneys who's worked on heart valves before. Please.
So that's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? If I don't have money, I cannot pay for paying the attorney. If I don't have the IP, I don't get money.
This is true. In some instances, you can, because after all, IP attorneys are frequently working with startups. So in some cases, you can.
So the question is that how do you get out of the kind of this dilemma of getting enough money to do the right patent work before you get the money because they want to see the patent work done? Okay.
Yeah. In some instances, you can convince them to take equity, to take payment contingent on, but higher payment contingent on getting funded. In other instances, that's where you're going to have to look to non-diluting capital. and/or angel funding. You may go to angel funding, saying, "Look, I've got a great idea, and I need money to get patents."
Yep, absolutely.
Please.
In terms of the numbers, when you do the assumptions,
Yeah.
would be a good idea to have like a best case scenario and a worst case scenario
Yeah.
to compare, like, because the numbers sometimes are quite
Yeah.
different.
So the question is, in terms of doing your numbers and your projections, should you do a best case scenario and a worst case scenario? And I would say that's an outstanding idea. I can tell you specifically that is what we would do. We would typically, we would do 3 scenarios. Fast, sort of middle state adoption, rapid adoption, slow adoption, to make sure. If this thing gets adopted at the fastest we can assume it would be, what would this be like? The middle, and certainly the one that we'd focus on. What about if it gets adopted more slowly? What does that do to evaluation? And if you've done that, that just shows more savviness, more experience. Especially if you can show that even in the slow adoption model, this is still a good investment, and that in the expected adoption, it's a great investment. Please.
What's the insight into the future? What's the lifespan that you want to hear about of the company?
So the question is, how long into the future do we want to see? For sure, we wanted to see 5-year financials. The other thing that we wanted to see really was, at what point do you get to a point where there will be an exit? Because after all, that's all. In the end, our business was creating exits. Exit meaning, company gets acquired, company goes public. That's the only time that, for the venture capitalists, that we get money and then give money back to our investors and perhaps to ourselves. And so what we wanted to see from that was both 5-year financials and how far out is it to where you get to a point where it will be credible for you to get either public or acquired at a high valuation. And how you're going to convince us of that. We want to see comparables from you're a heart valve company. We want to see what have the last 4 heart valve companies been bought for, and at what stage were they? What did they have? All right, so they were bought for 500 million, 625, and 715. Why are you going to be 4 years from now in that range? And if you haven't done that, it's going to raise the question: why did you not do that?
So Chris, I have a question. Speaking of financials and projections, there's sort of the common word that the VCs will see your projections, cut it in half. No matter what you say, they're going to cut it in half, and then they're going to run their own numbers based on that. Is that true, or is that a myth?
That's definitely true. Greg has a slide later on where he says, don't promise with the projections. And I'll tell you, don't promise, because one thing we had was a very good filing system, electronic filing system. And we would keep track of every single business plan we ever got, including with our commentaries about it, including with the documents we found relevant to it. And for sure, if we invested in something, or even if we didn't invest in something, we would keep, among other things, the projections. Because on the upside, if we turned it down and you had said 3 years from now I'll be at point ABC, and then you came back in 3 years and said, hey, I want to talk to you again about potentially investing. I know you turned me down 3 years ago. Let me show you. I predicted that and I beat all 3 of them. That was exceedingly compelling. And on the other hand, if we invested and you had predicted that by 4 years from now you were going to have $300 million in sale, and 4 years from now you got $10 million in sales, we knew where to find that document when we sat down with you again. Please.
Going back to your comments before about having a product versus having a company.
Yeah.
Let's say you have a platform technology
Yep.
that's applicable in lots of different markets, disease areas, but clearly you have to focus on something at the outset. How much diligence is one expected to do on every possible market, or do you really just choose one and say we're following this for this reason? How do you handle something like that that has multiple broad applications?
Great. So the question is, if you have a platform technology that can have multiple applications, you're obviously going to have to focus on a couple primarily. Are you supposed to now do market analysis, competition, et cetera, on 12 different industries with your team? I would say on the ones that you're going to focus, if you're going to take a model of this can be applied in 10 different ways, we're going to develop several of them ourselves, and we're going to outsource the other ones. You can be more superficial on the ones that you're going to spin off. And we loved platform technologies, right? Because that, you want to talk about $1 billion company, that's a way to get there. You want to talk about multiple shots on goal. Well, if, application 1 and 2 fail, we still have 8 others, so that was great. And we liked it because in terms of funding, it gave you the option to spin off one early on if you needed money for things, by this point you're probably past IP attorneys, but it's so funny, you can spin off one early on to some other large player, get some money, and it's a non-diluting source of capital. So we loved that. I would say you do get a pass on being as detailed. That said, the more detailed you are, the better, because you'll only push up your valuation if you show a very compelling thing showing that all 10 of these are great opportunities, and let me prove to you how each one of them is a great opportunity. All you'll be doing is pushing up the valuation that you'll get. And all you'll be showing is what a good job you're going to do of selling and or in some other way making profit off each of those applications.
At some point, does that come across as unfocused?
And then the question is, so does that come off as unfocused? Now we're going to do 10 different things simultaneously. Do we have complete lack of focus? I would say no if you present it as, we have 10 applications here. What we're going to do is we're going to sell one right away for some cash. We're going to push 2 or 3 because they're ones that we can handle. The clinical regulatory hurdles are not, exceedingly expensive, exceedingly hard, and they're sold to a focused market that we can get to with a small sales force. And then there are 5 others that you need to get to every primary care in the world, or have some incredibly huge trial is going to be associated with it. So those ones we're going to take and sell off to the Eli Lillys and the Pfizers of the world. And so if you say, I've got the 10, but I've prioritized which ones I'm going to put in myself, which ones I'm going to sell off early, and which ones I'm going to partner with large pharma, then you're not then you've got good focus and priorities, and you just have a great platform company, and you're going to do very, very well.
Great. So let's talk about the presentation and the business plan, how to format it. And let me ask you one question as we're getting started here. Would you say that venture capitalists, as they're listening to a presentation, are they patient or impatient?
So, absolutely, obviously impatient. One thing that I would say is the more you can get the people on the other side of the table to feel like they are part of the team and they are brainstorming about how we're going to do this together, that's when you're succeeding. Okay? So when the guys on the other side or the women on the other side of the table start jumping in with ideas of how we're going to get it to market, or which one we're going to sell off early and which one we're going to take to Pfizer, and how we're going to do the trial, that's when your pitch is going well. So basically, ideally, when you're doing a presentation of a startup to a group of venture capitalists and everyone's staring at you, and you can get them to start brainstorming of how they're going to shape it, how they're going to be involved in it, what they would do first and what they would do second, that keep going down that path.
So let's try to do that. I'd like to hear from you. What are the aspects of a business plan, the aspects of a presentation that you think the audience is going to be paying attention to and wanting to hear about? Kind of what's on the mind of the audience, whether they're an investor, somebody evaluating. In the back? Proof of concept, okay. Yep. Market need, okay. Why is this compelling? So let me put it this way, a little savagely. So you think the VCs are standing around saying, having a cup of coffee, is like, I'm really waiting to hear a good proof of concept story today.
No, but I would say if you can reduce technical risk by saying, it's not just been in vitro, it's not just been in small animals, but it was actually, they did, 25 primates, and then, some guy somewhere did 10 humans. It's really preliminary, just pilot, but, it looked like it worked in these 10 humans. All right, that gets a lot more interesting than just in vitro or something so early stage that you can't.
Is it a disruptive product? Is it going to create a space that's,
So is it disruptive? And so I'm going to push this to the higher principle level. So is it exciting? Is it make a difference? Why should I care? Do you care? Are you excited by it? If you're excited, maybe I'll get excited. Okay, so maybe it's whether it's disruptive, maybe proof of concept is the most exciting thing, because there's never been proof of concept in stem cells. And we have a stem cell technology that's finally proven the concept. That's exciting. That's why you should be excited. So what's exciting about this? Anything else? The team, who are the people? So absolutely true. But why should I trust that this is going to happen? How are you going to convince me that risks are low, opportunities high? So there's a bunch of things that are going to go into that, but team is clearly one. How do I have confidence in this?
And one thing I would say in terms of the team is when we had to evaluate a very compelling technology versus a very compelling team, actually the very compelling team was better if you had to choose, because if the technology turned out to have liver toxicity and just was not going to work, at least if you had an amazing team and you already have the money's already in, so now you got an amazing team with a few $1 million, you may actually get a success. Whereas if you have only an amazing technology and you don't have an amazing team, when the technology hits some roadblock that you can't get past, now you got nothing. So.
And a team that really works together. I mean, a very entrepreneurial team, but that clicks. I mean, we would sit around and we think, clearly a bunch of smart people, but you can tell that there's friction. Like, who's really leading it? That would be a red flag, even if the resumes are perfect. You want to see a team that clicks. Other thoughts? And what is your audience listening for?
Like initial investment compared to upside potential dollars.
Exactly. In other words, from a financial point of view, what's in it? What's in it for me? So how much pain am I going to feel, and what do I get out of it? Absolutely.
I would also say that in terms of initial investment and what the upside is going to be, of how many more rounds of financing are going to be necessary and how big they're going to be. Because remember, the venture capitalist the first time is just hearing the investment pitch and then deciding to invest or not. The second time, as a venture capitalist, one of your roles is to convince other people to invest in it. In fact, that's a major role, is to then at the next round, once you're already in, to convince fellow venture capitalists to invest in it. And so you want to make sure that the amount that you're going to have to convince them to invest is going to be achievable, that the team that's going to be going out to do that pitch is great at doing pitches. Because after all, if you invest, they make good progress, but they just can't raise money or they can't raise enough money, the whole thing's going to fail. So absolutely, to see that you got a team that's going to be able to raise money the next time around, and the amount of money they're going to need to raise is going to be within reason, and that they're going to have hit some milestones by then that will make it make sense for them to be able to raise that next round. Because after all, you don't want to invest $4 million today. 3 years from now, you need to raise another $10 million, but there's no plan that we're going to have some data at that point that will make it compelling for people to invest. Well, then that's a road to nowhere.
Good. So, general principles as you're creating the presentation and giving the presentation: clear, concise, well-researched. Your business plans have to be very specific and not gimmicky. That yes, you're selling something here, but nobody really likes to feel that they're being sold to. We can skip over this. And I can distribute, or Alice can distribute the presentation. There are certain archetypes, particularly in health-related companies, that weigh different issues differently, whether it's intellectual property, clinical validation, scientific plan. So think through those issues. I want to pause here for a second and talk about, this is probably the one of the most important points that we'd like you to go home with. Always be thinking what's on your audience's mind, whether it's the judge in the business plan contest, whether it's the venture capitalist, whether it's the angel investor, whether it's your board. What are you asking from them? Make sure that you just articulate what you want. And don't take it for granted that, well, it's obvious, it's a business plan, I want you to invest in me. Make sure you articulate exactly what that means. Where's my payout? Me as the audience. And you should have the same question. You guys should be asking the same questions of us. Right? What's your payout from coming here to listen to this talk? I hope you get a payout, which is you've learned something about about business plans from people who are experienced in the field. That you get to go home and have learned something from this talk. So there's always a payout. The audience is always looking for a payout. Does it make sense? We talked about does the upside balance out the downside, and how there's definitely downside. Everything is going to have a lot of risks. Don't sugarcoat the risks. We're going to go, we understand what the risks are, we understand what the competition is, we are talented enough, smart enough to overcome those risks. We have IP, we've got a unique model that's going to overcome those risks. And finally, why should I be excited? Are you excited? If you're not excited, how can I be excited? But why is this a compelling story? And it can be, it often is, this is a huge market and it's completely untapped and we're going to go in there and really we're going to be the first in class and best in class. That's an exciting story. Why are you excited? Why are you dedicating your life to do this? And why should I get excited? Thoughts, questions? Yes?
So my question is, what happens when you're entering into a tapped market, but there's a huge amount of new discoveries to be made? How do you go into that discussion then? So essentially, there's a lot of applications that do similar things, but then you're doing it better. The implementation is better.
Mm-hmm.
How do you start that conversation?
So the question is, if you're going into a market that's already being served, so it's a highly competitive market, say, how do you build the case that this is still a compelling story? Jack Welch used to say that if you're number one in your market, you need to change your definition of the market so you understand what it's like to be one of the smallest suppliers in that market. So change your orientation and show that this is a much bigger market than we're thinking about. There's always an opportunity to go after. So applying that principle to what you're saying is, what is the untapped need here? What's the biggest search engine on the planet right now? Google. I mean, when Google started, was there a clear need to have yet another search engine? There was Yahoo, there was Alta Vista, there was a whole bunch of them, but there was clearly an untapped need that they completely tapped into and figured out. So I would say there's always a compelling story, almost always a compelling story about an untapped need. Any thoughts about that?
The one thing I would say also is, in medical devices, the existing companies are always needing something new in order the current technology prices over time are always getting pushed down, they get commoditized. And the way that the large medical device makers can bump margins back up again is introducing something new features. So stents come in, stents initially are priced very high, they become more of a commodity, their prices go down. You can't just argue to bump prices back up, but if somebody can invent a drug-eluting stent, then they can introduce that as the new, better technology, and that commands a premium. And we basically see that in medical devices over and over again, where you have a technology that more or less meets the need, but gets a commodity pricing over time, and pursuing a new technology can break that.
So one final thought about that. You use the kind of the judo trick to make it to your advantage. So what's the market for consumer moon travel? I don't know. That business doesn't exist. What's the market for transatlantic air travel? Well, we know what that market is. We can size that market. And we can say that we can do it better, we can deliver better services, faster flights, blah, blah, blah. But to be able to go into a market and say, we know a lot about this market, so that actually reduces your risk. We're not talking about sending people to the moon and building a new market in a new place that hasn't been done before. Okay, I get the excitement part, but now my risk is going way up. If this is a well-established existing market, we know a lot about it, and there's rules that we can play by. Yes?
So if the market doesn't exist right now, but there's literature out there saying that there's a need, the government is funding grants for it, okay, but the market doesn't exist, right? How do you value something like that? How do you assess the risk for that?
So if the market doesn't exist yet there's research activity in that market that is suggesting a market could exist. There could be a growth opportunity in the market. I mean, it's a tough question. There's benchmarks that you can look at. There's other kind of references that you can look at to what's the closest proximity that you can build a case around. But the other thing I would say is that if somebody is funding work in this area, then there is some kind of nascent market. It might not be exactly the kind of market where consumers are buying off-the-shelf product, but there is clearly some impetus here that shows us there's interest in the marketplace. But I think you have to build the case that we have enough evidence that there's a need, and that payers, whoever the final payer is, whether it's customers or insurance companies or whatever, that there's enough interest here that they'll actually pay for the products. Yeah. And what's overcoming that to preventing them to paying for? Is it because the product doesn't exist? Or is it because the products that currently are lousy? Is it because they haven't been approved yet? Are there regulatory issues, safety issues? There's some. We've identified the issues that has kept this market from existing. The use of stem cells doesn't exist in the market because it hasn't gotten regulatory approval, and we've targeted that as the biggest downside here. And this is why we're going to address the regulatory hurdles of stem cells.
And what I'd be looking at wanting to see is, one, if it's life sciences, I'd want to be speaking to practitioners, saying, basically surveying practitioners. If that existed, would you be using it? And then looking at pharmacoeconomic arguments of, if it was priced at this, if its success rate, efficacy was that, would this pan out? Could you make an argument to payers and to the government that even though this is expensive, because it's treating successfully a condition that hadn't been able to be treated before, the pharmacoeconomics of it actually makes sense even though it's an expensive treatment? And then I'd be looking at technology risk of, all right, well, if it hasn't ever been done before, is that just previously we didn't have the science and the technology to solve this puzzle, but now we do, and that you're going to successfully do it? Or is it that it's an inherently intractable problem, and that technology risk is too great to back you?
So, as the phrase goes, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. The most important part of your presentation is the beginning, the introduction. The first impression that you make, whether it's written or verbal, is always going to set the tone. And if you can get the reader's interest on the first page, or if you can get your audience's interest in the first 2 lines, then you've got a much greater chance of having them pay attention and stay with you. So I want to talk about a presentation format that applies to email, phone calls, venture capital presentations, board presentations, and it's the opening. In your opening, you should try to cover these 4 points.
And we're going to want to see if anybody's bold enough afterwards from teams that are coming up with startups to take a shot at presenting their thing in this format that Greg's going to describe.
Absolutely. Well, so at the end, we'll show this slide again, and we're going to ask for volunteers, to try to give us an elevator speech. What's the topic of what I'm going to talk about? Why is this important? What's the purpose to you? What am I asking of you? And a preview of where the discussion is going to go. So as an example, today we're going to talk about international expansion of our product. This is greatly going to impact our revenues, and we want to gain your approval so we go forward into the Asian market. And today we're going to discuss our human resource needs, our distribution needs, and our financial needs.
And the one thing I'd say is, I can't tell you how many presentations we went through where people didn't start out like that. And so as they're speaking, essentially any human being is trying to figure out the answer to these questions. Like, what are we talking about here? Why is it important? What do these guys want from us? And how are they going to convince us to go through it? And if you don't answer those questions in the opening, you've lost about half of the person's attention as they're trying to answer these questions for themselves.
Last week, I had a board meeting. The way I opened the board meeting was saying, this is a very important board meeting. We need to gain approval on our 2014 budget because the deadline is in 4 weeks. I'm going to ask the board to vote on this budget by the end of the meeting, and we're going to go over our product plan and our client pipeline, which underlies our budget. Got it. No argument, no discussion. What are we doing here? Why am I here? We go forward. And the budget got approved. Okay. I'm going to skip through a bunch of slides here. Again, happy to distribute. This is the full outline of a business plan, all the different sections. You need to have an executive summary. We're going to look at some examples in a minute. You need think of this as your tip. What's the topic? Why is this important? Why is this? What's the purpose that you should get excited about? What am I asking of you? We talked about the industry. We talked about sizing the market. Just some ideas. I won't go through the details here, but as you're thinking about sizing the market, don't think about it just today. Think about what's going to happen when you hit the market, because chances are you're going to be in development phase for a while. So the market for widgets at a high level is X, but then if you cut down the competition and et cetera, it comes down to a much smaller, much more realistic number today, and how is that going to look in the future? So think about the market as a dynamic, changing entity. Management team, we talked about the design plan. Categorically, intellectual property is critical, particularly in life science companies. And I think you've heard us beat home this point that often business plans, particularly short business plans, under stress the risks, the risk factors, and how we're going to mitigate those risk factors. Financial plans. Should we pause on this for a second?
I would just say very quickly, remember, as you're looking at different funding sources, venture capital is essentially the most expensive kind of money there is. So what you're going to give up in return for venture capital money is going to be more than pretty much any other source of funding you can name. The advantages of it are that you may get large amounts of funding for something that's very high risk, unproven technologies, et cetera. To the extent that you can get funding from non-diluting sources, grants, et cetera, that should be preferential because that'll move you forward to proof of concept or other milestones with less dilution. So I'll always be doing that. That's the main point that I would make on that slide.
Yep. And when you say capital is expensive, what does that mean?
It means that the percent of your company that you're going to give up in return for venture capital dollars is going to be high. Now, why might you choose to do that? Well, you're not going to be able to walk into Citizens Bank and tell them I'm going to develop technology for a market that doesn't yet exist and walk out with a loan for that, right? So you can get large amounts of funding which can back things that can be very experimental, et cetera. But the percentage of your company that you're going to give up for each $1 million that you get is going to be higher than pretty much any other source of capital that you can name. And then any kind of non-diluting capital that you can get, grants, et cetera, is going to be preferable because that will take you further along before you have to give up part of your company.
Some considerations about presenting to venture capitalists. Do you want to say one sentence about this?
I would say just a few things that I've seen people do that I think were disastrous. One was basically getting into an argument over things. Okay, if someone has a strongly held view, you don't think it's correct, you may want to try to address it in some way. But I would not pick an argument about how big is the market for renal cell carcinoma. Okay, just push that aside. I would say other points are just like Greg said, trying to leap over the downsides and minimize them. That only looks naive. So you want to be the one pointing out all the weaknesses and what your plan is for addressing them, rather than trying to just brush aside the possibility of technological failure, or the possibility of regulatory hurdles. in terms of presentation, I think the main thing to remember is these folks who might invest in you today, they're going to have to be with you as you go to raise your next round of funding. And so just like Greg said, you want to show your excitement and that you're dynamic and that you're all in. Sometimes people would bring in a CEO who had been 30 years at Pfizer, thinking, well, that's incredibly, how compelling is that? The startup company, they got this incredibly senior pharma executive. But from our point of view, we could tell that person isn't that hungry anymore. So they're unlikely to be up at 3 in the morning getting ready for the next round financing meeting that's going to happen at 7 a.m. We don't want to see somebody, we want someone who's hungry in it. So showing them the excitement, the dynamism, the hunger.
Good. We're gonna jump forward. There's some pitfalls. We talked about a lot of this, so again, keep in your mind, what is the audience looking to what is the audience listening to again? What's on the mind of the audience? Payoff. Team. What's that? The exit strategies. What do you want from me? What's the ask? Why are you excited? What's the downside? How are you mitigating the risks? Right? So these are somewhat redacted examples from previous years. Let's go through a couple of these. And what's the first thing that you notice before you read any words? It is very pretty. But it is difficult to read. And this isn't a criticism of these particular plans. These were all finalists, so they couldn't have been that bad. But there's always something that we can improve. Let me just read through a couple of this sentences here. I won't read every word, but this company explores data collection and analysis in regard to public health with a holistic approach to sensing urban environment. All right? Currently, 50% of the world's population lives in urban areas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Environment is a major factor with the increase of urbanization and the global shift into the city. Urban environment represents a huge impact on health. Okay. Recent research explores the effect of improved built environment on asthma, obesity, cardiovascular. Okay. All right. And there's some irritation of the nose, wheezing. Okay. So let me pause there. How are you guys reacting to this first paragraph? And this is literally the first paragraph of the business plan.
It's not about the business.
It's not about the business. Okay. So what does that mean?
Well, I think it's too much background information too soon.
Okay.
Really.
Too much background too soon. Okay. We had one rejection here. Why are you rejecting it?
The first one is too distracting. So when I look at it, I cannot see. I don't understand what is going on over there.
So,
my eyes hurting right now. I'm looking at it.
so we're feeling pain just reading this. Yes.
It doesn't really tell you what they're going to do and accomplish by doing this project.
That's right. I mean, at this point, and I've invested, 12 seconds of my precious life, and I still don't know what they're trying to do. I understand that there's some big problem that they're trying to solve. Don't quite know how they're going to solve it.
I would give them credit that I do get the feeling from this. This feels to me like a huge market, right? I mean, that piece I like is that it's not a niche thing. I mean, they're talking about, as far as I can tell so far, every person who lives in a city in the world.
That's right. And remember, this is a finalist, so clearly there's something here. This isn't a criticism of the business or the people. We don't know the business. We don't know the people. And literally, we just took the first paragraphs from a random sampling of finalists, but they didn't have the benefit of listening to Chris before they wrote their business plan. Yeah. Any other thoughts? So what's your mood? What score do you get? Are you giving this on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being let's invest today. We have a 1. Show me your fingers. Show me your fingers. We have 4s, 3s, 3s and 4s. Okay.
All right.
All right. 5s. Okay. A generous 5 back there. What's
I'd
that?
actually give them a 7.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that's important is to be able to show that there's pain, that
Mhm.
the pain that's so drastic that it needs to be saved, that there needs to be something done, right? So here I feel like they've given me something that makes me say, I hate the background, this is too long, this is very boring, but there's some sort of pain, and I'm
Mhm.
willing to now invest my time to read further. So
That's right. That's right. So there's something about here that they're excited about. There's some kind of big market here. So yeah, that's true. We should give them credit for that. So there's a 7. Let's look at the next one. Again, I'm not going to read through everything. Road traffic injuries are a global epidemic. Okay, building on the team's visit to Bangladesh. That sounded really nice. We're going to build Lifesaver, which will address initial barriers to effective trauma care. Okay, targeting lack of publicly run ambulance services and train trauma first responders. We'll build a community-level knowledge on trauma, first aid in rural villages. Okay, we will aim to maximize our impact and efficiency by building strong local partnerships. All right. As we prepare our first pilot training sessions this month, we're still relying on personal funds for travel, etc. The first stage, $5,000 and the grand prize from the contest will provide a major boost to our implementation and allow us to demonstrate impact early on to attract future investors. All right, so let's say what was good about this. What was positive here?
Upfront, it tells you that there's an unmet need or
Unmet, right? They talk about the unmet need.
some change,
Yep, that's good. That's right. So it talks about the unmet need.
but it doesn't tell you how this is going to transfer into a profitable system, unless this could be just for nonprofit purposes as well.
Okay. A little fuzzy on the business plan. What else is good here? I'm sorry? To test their model. They've tested their model. Or they're about to test their model. They're about to test their model. Yeah. So there's potentially a way to validate what they're doing. Yes? Yeah. There certainly is flow. There certainly is flow.
Confirm support.
What's that?
Confirm support.
Confirm support. Go on, tell me more.
Well, from Empower Mobile Technology Company, so they have
Mhm.
already interactions with sort of companies that can help implement their
That's right.
strategies.
So potential partners that can help them get there.
I think the last paragraph, they have a clear vision of where they want to use funding and who won.
That's right. So they clearly say what their funding need is, and well, let's just stop there.
I would echo that last point of, for any investor, if we put this in this case $5,000, where's that going to get us? And they answer that question very explicitly. The other thing I'd say in terms of Greg's comment about excitement and commitment, they're committed because they say we're still relying on personal funds for traveling and training materials. So obviously these people are passionate and committed to, they're putting their money where their mouth is of funding this out of personal funds.
So a potential room for improvement. Yes?
They say they'll partner with telecoms, pharmaceuticals, and car manufacturers. I've never heard of a company that partners with all three.
Mhm. Perhaps a little overly ambitious, a little pie in the sky. Okay. Potentially confusing partnership strategy. Could be clarified. See, my reaction, perhaps we had different reactions, but my reaction is like, all right, I get your ask, and what are you going to do with it? It'll be a major boost. Great. But what does that mean, to our implementation and allow us to what? To demonstrate impact. We all want to demonstrate impact, but it's not really bringing it home to me. Well, what does that mean, a major boost? How? Demonstrating impact, how? So, I'll continue reading, but it would be nice to be able to address that early on.
So do you think it would be show that there's a X percentage of improvement, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. I mean, for me, it's a little bit fuzzy and jargony to say that we're going to demonstrate impact. It would be much better to say that we're going to demonstrate impact by having an installed base of 50 villages in our target territory. Let me jump to number 5. Okay. We at Strong Arm want to eliminate STIs and significantly improve individual and public health by providing a simple, safe, secure mobile application for people to share their information. We want to become the gold standard, empower individuals to be proactive, etc. We want to help usher in a new social norm, etc. All right, what's executive summary? Sex. College students are curious about it and doing it. I took out a couple sentences just for, not for that reason, just because I wanted to fit this all on one page. All right, United States, there are 20 million new preventable infections, $17 billion. Okay. Young adults, 15 to 24. Okay. Sex is a motivator. We are ushering a new social paradigm. We envision a future where this application is a badge of honor. To achieve this goal, we're developing a mobile application to engage, educate, and empower college students, et cetera, et cetera. No simple. Okay, in a recent survey we conducted, 89% of young adults said they would be willing to use such a system. Our academic backgrounds, our team building, our team is poised to, for success. With a relatively low initial investment, we aim to serve 500,000 users in the next few years, become a profitable business, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, what's your reaction to this? On a scale of 1 to 10, hold up fingers. Oh, we're seeing double digits. Yeah. Somewhere between 5, 7, 8, 10. Yeah. And so why? I think the crowd is telling us that this is resonating better. Why?
All the details.
Details.
They've done a lot of research.
Exactly. Exactly. So they're actually giving us the information. So it's less jargony, but it's actually it's details about what the problem is. All right, you guys tell me. What else? What else is good here?
Look at the age range of people who spend a lot of money.
Exactly. So what does that tell? They've really gotten very specific about their market. Is it true? Is it not true? We can debate that. But they've gotten very specific. It gives us something very tangible to understand their market size.
What else do you like?
Yes?
Well, it seems to have the potential to become something that's the norm, more or less the way previous, internet mobile applications have been.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of you can see the potential of inventing a need for it.
Mm-hmm.
If it becomes the expectation that you check somebody's strong arm profile before having sex with them, then that means that everybody has to get one.
Mm-hmm.
So even if your revenue comes from ads, it basically locks down everybody in that range, whether they want to or not, after you hit a critical mass.
So in other words, it sounds like this is a potential platform that could get broadly accepted, widely used, that there's a large need out here, and they could potentially fill it. You can kind of feel their excitement. You can kind of feel they're a little bit playful about it. They really get your attention. They really are telling you a story of why they think this is a great idea, which is critical.
Have they addressed the potential downsides, do you feel? Or some of them?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Well, in sort of vetting their own team, they sort of mentioned the downsides in terms of medical data sharing and the problems that can be associated with that. That's why they seek advice from outside sources.
Exactly. So when you read this, one of the first questions you're going to have to yourself is, well, isn't this stuff confidential? And what about HIPAA? They brought it up. They don't wait for you to say, well, that's a great idea, but medical privacy, you can't do it. No, they say, no, we looked into that. We thought about it. We've got advisors who know about HIPAA. It's okay. Where else have they addressed one potential downside, would you say, in this brief thing? The survey of users. So what's the other question, right? Forget, okay, now you told me we can deal with the whole HIPAA privacy thing. I'm not quite sure how you're going to do it, but clearly you're saying you know about it and you got a plan. You're going to walk me through that, okay? And then what's the other thing? Well, good God, is anybody going to be willing to do this? Okay, you've surveyed these people who are the right age and who are a huge number of people, and it turns out you know the answer to that. 84% are willing to use it. All right, that was my other, that would be another immediate concern. You thought it through yourself. You didn't wait for us to push back. And the meeting could have ended very quickly because if we didn't have that answer, perhaps we say, well, I don't think anybody will use this. Nice to meet you. What else?
That makes me kind of question how they survey these young adults. 89%, did they know that they would have to go to Quest Diagnostics or PCP where they get a bunch of tests that in and of themselves are somewhat fallible,
yeah,
and that might provide false reassurance?
Yeah.
I don't know. That kind of sticks out.
Yep. So the question is, when they did this survey, did they do it in a thoughtful way where they're really laying out for people that it's not just that you sign on to the web app, but you got to go to your physician. The test may turn out with false answers, et cetera. Did they do the survey intelligently? And I think that's a very good point. If it turns out that the survey was done in a ridiculous fashion, then that would just point to them being out of their depth. Versus if it said, as we get into the details of, the presentation, how they did their survey, and they walk us through and they say, we laid out for them, you got to go get a test done. The test may not be perfect, but would you still be willing to do it? And 84% came out. I think that's a very good point.
The breakup of male versus female who responded to that survey is very important, I think.
Yep.
If 88% of people who responded are males, so I don't know.
I think these are good points. So we're questioning kind of the makeup of the survey, kind of the way the survey was done. I think this brings home the point that even in a good presentation, there's always something, right? There's always a little bit of room for improvement. Again, we chose the finalists, and we wanted to show a spectrum. But even in a good presentation, there's always a little bit of refining, improvement. In here, it's probably, they make a pretty powerful assertion that you immediately gravitate towards, and you start questioning the credibility. So maybe, a few less playful lines and a little bit more, credibility would have served them better. Yes?
Could there be a problem of overachieving? Like they're saying they're going to eliminate STDs. It seems like that's a little bit not going to happen most likely, but it seems to work in that field.
Overreach, yeah, could be potential a question of overreach that again, begins to question the credibility.
We're getting to, Alice, if I understand correctly, we're getting close to the end of the.
Till whenever you get done. But I just had a point to some of the questions about how the survey was conducted. Remember that this is your intro, and so you're, as Greg said, you're trying to set up kind of the path in which you're going to take your reader. So you don't need to address all these intricate details within the intro, but you do have to, if you're going to say you survey, you should include how you survey people like later in your business.
Yep. Yes.
What do you think about the fact that they didn't present any path to profitability in that introduction? Because it's not, if you're thinking about this business idea, that's, besides their market research and everything, that's the one thing that's really not clear to me, because they're talking about an application that people probably spend very short amounts of time on. It's not going to be a viable advertising platform, and they really don't address that. How much would you see that as a problem with this?
Indeed. So the question here is about what's their path to profitability, or what's their their financial model. Unknown. I mean that.
Is that always something that should be in an introductory description?
Well, I mean, again, a little bit of a forced situation. So I don't recall off the top of my head. Maybe that came in the very next paragraph when we just didn't have room to present it. But the fact that you're bringing it up and it's on your mind, I think addresses a point. What's my payout here? As an investor, what's my payout? When am I going to get my money back?
Yeah. And I would agree with you as someone who, I invested in biotech and medical devices, not in apps and things like that. So I didn't know that sector, and so I would strongly agree with your question of, if you're going to tell me a few quick points, one of them I want to know is, how does this thing make a profit?
Yes.
What would a consideration like increase in unprotected sex leading to unplanned pregnancies and global health impact like that? While I recognize this is a business, where would that sort of consideration fall?
So where would the consideration of
Right.
unprotected sex leading to pregnancies, et cetera?
Unplanned pregnancies and this app potentially leading to
Right.
unprotected sex.
Right, how this app would facilitate that, you would say, right, and sort of a liability downside. I think that would be extremely important to bring up as part of the team to show that people have been thoughtful to think about that, and then to have some plan for how they're going to mitigate that. Absolutely, because otherwise, I'm going to look at it and say, well, so I'm going to invest my money in it. All these, you're going to sort of do something good, but then you're going to have all these unintended, quite negative consequences. This thing's going to get very bad publicity, which is going to sour it up for people, and it's going to hurt the upside. So my take on that would be, the team have to be the one who put that on the table. Obviously not in the initial thing, but in somewhere in the presentation, in the details, and who walk through how we're going to address that successfully and keep that from happening. If there is a way to keep that from happening.
So the principle here that perhaps is missing from the intro is, what are the risks again? How are you addressing the risks? Have you identified all the risks? How are you mitigating those risks?
Yeah. And it may not have to be in the intro, but it sure better be somewhere in the business plan and in the presentation. Okay.
Question?
How important is a good name? And probably more important question, how important is it to not have a bad name? Because I don't know. I saw strong arm in big bold letters, and I saw sex a bunch of times up there, and my mind went to the wrong place.
Yeah.
Seems like a really bad choice of name.
So how bad is a bad
Right.
name? And that's not on them. I changed the names to protect
They had a McKinsey consultant choose their name.
That's right. So, but I think I mean, there's right there aren't there examples of the Chevy Nova, right? Which in Spanish is no go. So I don't know if it's an apocryphal story, but supposedly couldn't market it in South America. All right, I
would say one quick thing on names, sorry to interrupt, is my personal guide for names is Jeff Bezos in choosing Amazon for Amazon rather than books.com. So that, because if you're old, like us, you remember when Amazon first came out, it was just selling books. But he was smart, and for several years, at least that was my perception, it was just a place to buy books. But he was smart enough to pick a name that allowed him to now, if you think of buying things for Amazon, you probably don't even think of books. You think of buying everything and anything from them. And that he was smart enough to give a name that didn't limit their possibilities. And that came up first in alphabetical lists, or far up.
So I'd love to give you the opportunity to practice your elevator speech. So we're going to ask for a few bold volunteers.
And it doesn't have to be great.
It doesn't have to be great.
Yeah. Anyone from a project team who wants to, if they're coming in to present, wants to say what the topic would be, what the importance of their thing is, what they'd ask for?
If you present, I'll give you a high loud mug, which we don't even sell.
Yeah, there you go.
They've got a good name. It says hi.
I'll do it.
Yes.
Great. All right. Yeah.
My name is Alex. I spent the last 7 years in researching stroke rehabilitation. Stroke affects approximately 3% of the population. I claim I found a way to reduce the cost per patient by something between $5,000 to $10,000. The team is my brother and me. My brother's a mechanical engineer. I'm the neuroscientist. I have successfully sold a startup that I joined a couple of years ago, so I have startup experience. I have research experience. Where are we? So we have competition. We are better than the competition. I cannot tell you why, though, because we're in the process of patenting the IP, and I can collect like 100 NDAs. But we have the secret ingredient, and yeah, we are looking for approximately $300,000 to make it happen. But we'll probably go to see VCs in a year from now when we have the IP, actually. So.
Excellent. So we heard background, we heard about the market, we heard about experience, we heard about some of the path going forward. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you to go through the same thing, 4 short sentences. That's all you get, 4 short sentences. No multiple clauses in those sentences, 4 short declarative sentences.
All right. Our product, if 5 years down the road, will be able. That's applause, right?
I'm interested. Go ahead.
5 years down the road, our product will be capable of saving $10,000 per patient. We are talking about 3% of the world population. Our team is small, but we're good.
I think that's good. I think that's good. That's excellent. That's excellent.
I would give you a lot of credit on that. You got me for it. You showed why it was important. It's stroke. You showed why it's important because it's a huge market. You showed why it's important because you're taking a significant chunk out of the cost. You got the piece in about a great team, which I always like the team, so whether or not it's part of the tip thing, I like that very much. And then you got to what your ask was, that you, with $300,000, you were going to get somewhere.
Got the most important point. Not only do we save money, but also do we statistically significantly, clinically proven, improve the outcome of the patient. So we'll make this place a better world. So, and I don't care about the money. I really care about the product.
I would say that when you distill it down to 3, 4, 5, a couple of sentences, it's better. It's just like the business hasn't changed, right? You haven't changed. It's a better story. So thank you for being brave and standing up.
Somebody else? Anybody else want to take a shot?
Yes.
Should I do the short version?
Do whichever.
Yeah, try to keep it to the elevator speech. You're standing at the elevator, and world famous venture capitalist is standing next to you.
I'm interested in I'm designing a platform that brings all designers, planners, and architects together to join forces to mitigate disaster relief and prevention. That's it.
Thank you. So I'm going to now try to ask you to say the same thing in 2 or 3 short declarative sentences.
And I want to hear what you want, what the ask is.
Since this is just new, I haven't figured out how much money that would need to.
You can make up a number. Ask for more. We're putting it. If we're investing 300 million euros, we can't dole it out 40,000 at a time. Again.
Or listen, it doesn't. And you can certainly do it. Take it from the financial point of view. But on the other hand, be thinking about your audience, and let's sort of create the situation that you've run into, say, Chris, or a colleague of Chris's, and at the elevator. And is it money that you're going to ask for? Maybe there's something else that you're going to ask for.
Yeah.
And just a point of feedback, I felt that you kind of buried the lead. Because your major point is that you're trying to address disaster relief, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you talked about all the people involved, and I didn't know what they were involved in.
Mm-hmm.
So I would start with, we're going to, this new endeavor of ours will greatly impact the way that we approach and address national relief by, bringing together X, Y, and Z in a different model.
Right. Okay. So, all right. The current format of disaster relief throws money at the problem in a relief format, but we are doing it to prevent. That doesn't sound good. Okay, so we're trying to create preventative design to be a process of nonprofit organizations rather than disaster relief, because I'm not going to do that. I don't know if that's going to.
No, that's good. That's good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for speaking up. Your audience is wondering, I think clearly you've got passion here. Clearly, you're excited about what's going on. What do you want from them? So maybe another way to think about it is we've got an opportunity to create a new process in disaster relief that changes the focus from relief to the process. And I'd love to be able to set an appointment with you, sit down with you, and talk about our business plan and our financing plan, get your input, because we're pretty early in the game.
Yeah, and I would say that definitely to Greg's point, you don't have to be asking for money. Right. You can be saying, want to get your take on it, or some other ask. Absolutely.
Alice is going to lock the door. We have food, so we can stay here for a long time. Yeah.
My name is Yan Fong. I'm a researcher in the field of maternal and child health, and I'm also a mom of a daughter. She's 1 year old now. And in my pregnancy, I thought about us who use iPhone and also different kinds of apps. I'm also thinking about all the pregnant women in developing countries. They only have the simplest cell phone. So my partner and I, we developed a bank of text message and to send it free for pregnant women for 10 months. And we're trying to figure out whether there is any impact on maternal health and on newborn health. Right now we got funding from an European foundation, but we are thinking that right now we are working in China. We are going to sell this idea to Chinese central government. And due to one-child policy, maybe in China, women can learn from their own experience, but definitely they will benefit from our research, like in terms of the literature review of the scientific evidence, and also from our dedicated design.
Thank you. Feedback?
I thought you did a very good job of setting the stage of the importance of what this is. You're setting the topic. It was clear what you're working on. You got to the importance of the scale of the problem and how you're trying to improve it. The one piece where again I was less clear was in terms of the purpose of what you'd be asking for, but you can figure that out. Presumably you're going to be asking for more funding to push this through to the next thing. That was very well done.
That was very well done. And I think that it's against human nature, or maybe our human nature, to directly ask people things. It's actually a relief if you're having a conversation and we know that there's going to be a transaction here, to know, well, what are we in for here? What do you want from me? So it probably goes against your soul, but knowing what you want is a relief. I think somebody else was volunteering.
Please.
My name is Michelle Ferguson. I have a company that I'm just starting that is basically a social website for people who are dying from diseases, or not dying, but diagnosed with diseases. So they will, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. They'll be able to go on the website, having been diagnosed with a disease, we're trying to embark on that emotional link. So maybe if you can find a friend who's diagnosed with the same disease, it will prove to be very beneficial to you if you can find someone who, or even when it comes to like food allergies, if you can meet your spouse that just happens to have the food allergy that you have, it cuts down the arguments when it comes to cooking. So that's the business that I have in mind. I'm having a terrible time finding a team, so if anyone has any suggestions, please look me up or come and introduce yourself to me. And I'm looking for to possibly meet with someone who has more experience in that field and kind of gain some knowledge on what to do and which road to travel.
Thank you. Thank you. That was terrific.
Yeah, I think that we all understood exactly what you're doing. It's pretty clear what you made clear what the importance is, and now we know what you're asking for, and just like we talked about, it isn't money, but you're asking for team members.
Yep. And I feel compelled to help you. You know, like I know I can give you some names, some connections.
Yeah. Please.
So we live in a world where the 36 million people living with HIV have a very treatable disease with drugs that work very well to manage that disease. But a large part of the world, representing about 30 million of those people, live in a part of the world where access to appropriate diagnosis and appropriate care is very limited due to limited resources. And this is primarily due to problems with drug resistance and the ability to appropriately detect that resistance and be able to change and manage care appropriately. So at Aldatu Biosciences, we have a small team of business-minded scientists who have developed a technology that can reduce costs and the time associated with testing for drug resistance to HIV treatments, and allow caregivers to better assign treatments to those patients with HIV. So it improves access and improves the quality of life of those patients while reducing costs of suboptimal treatment. And we are seeking seed funding to further develop this technology so that we can implement this testing in the developing world.
Fantastic. Outstanding, outstanding. I felt like I understood the market. It's a large market, and I understand how you're segmenting the market. I have understand who's working on it, and at least enough about your backgrounds. I also understand what you're asking for, and in general, what you want to do with that. But I thought that was great. And any other feedback, any other thoughts?
I thought you really framed the problem and the issues well, and drew in people socially,
Like the strong arm example, I think you could benefit by being a little bit more specific with what you're going to do with the money. So just like they were saying, sort of as they were saying, the strong arm was going to take the money and sort of what was it, show that they worked or something. You could be a little more, with X amounts of dollars, we're going to start up the operation in this many countries or something, a little bit more specific. Please.
Just a question regarding that. How do we, is it better to have a proposition that might not be precise, or to not have a proposition at all? As opposed to, with regards to how much you'll get out of that much money. Where will you, if I say I'm going to do this much with this much money, is it better off that I'm 100% accurate with that number, or that I don't give that number at all?
I would say, so the question is, I'm asking for $10 million, and then should I be very precise about what I'm going to accomplish with it, but what if I don't accomplish exactly that? Or should I, since I might not accomplish exactly that, should I just not put a specific milestone that I'm going to achieve? I would say absolutely, positively, you better put a specific milestone. We've been around for a while, so we know that there's a good chance that you may get 50% of the milestone, or you may have to change courses and you may end up at a totally different milestone, et cetera. But there, at least on the VC side, there's absolutely no way that we're going to invest, $4 million to go sort of somewhere.
Yeah. And you don't want to be in the position of having me feel like, well, what about $1 million? Do you need $1 million? Do you need $2 million? You want me to answer this for you? I don't want to do that. I want you to tell me I need $1 million, and then I'm feeling comfortable saying, actually, I think what you need is 700,000. You can get there with 700,000. But now we're having a more informed dialogue about it.
Yeah. And I want to know where you're going to get, be it $1 million or be it 700,000, that at least you got a clear idea that what you're going to do is you're going to open up operations, in 18 countries over the course of, 1 year. May turn out not to be 18, may not turn out to be 1 year, but at least that you got a clear, and a budget to go with it, of why $700,000 is going to get you to that point.
So I think with that, we'll wrap up for tonight. So if you can join me in thanking Greg and Chris.